Hi, Alex. How are you? We'll start shortly, okay? Sebastian, we'll start in about a minute. You can go ahead and start your Raspberry Pi. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's just yeah, for some reason they're not showing up as usual, but possibly it's getting close to final exam for summer session, so might be that. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I think when people come and join, that will be. Sorry, I posted the lab kind of late. I was trying to work through some of the library issues. So um, I'll share screen. So today we are going to talk about how to use Raspberry Pi with WhatsApp. WhatsApp is popular. It's been popular for a long time. You can use it to message or call. And we can take a look at how we would utilize some of the library to be able to access WhatsApp. And if you visit their website or use your phone to download the app, you would see that there are several releases of WhatsApp. So we have the regular one that most people use for your mobile phone. And then you also have something that will be for business use. I remember when they first came to the market, it was, a lot of people start using it and I thought it was really cool. Basically, WhatsApp is just a way that you can direct message or you can use voice over IP, which is ultimately uses your phone number to call, very much like Google Voice. And back then, we didn't have a lot of app that was useful like that. So it became very well known and it quickly got picked up by a lot of people and also people invest in their companies. Um, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing. So you see that there are variation in the releases that's available out there. So you have WhatsApp for Business, and then you can use it because there are libraries. Yosep is the Python library that's written for that will work with WhatsApp, or you can use it to install WhatsApp. So in this lab, we are going to do a WhatsApp bot. So at least you know how it's programmed and how it's able to do. The challenge that you're going to probably run into is just to get, if you can get the WhatsApp app installed onto the Raspberry Pi platform, you will be able to test it. But I want to just go through the exercises and show you each area of the library and what you're going to be using. Um, and you can test it using your mobile device and messaging it. And so that way you can see how that's done. So when you launch your WhatsApp app in your Pi, you can send messages back and forth with another device. And what we can do is we can automate some of the answers so that way, it will be able to really streamline the process for you so you don't have to retype some of the messages. So you can see how message communication automation can be done. So in a way, we are doing what's called a Telegram bot. This is commonly used, especially when you are chatting with customer service. Um, when you communicate with them, what they do is they build in some of the conditions, and some company would probably use um, machine learning with it, or sometime they would have AI incorporated. So that way it's intuitive to the user's specific needs. So all of that is really programmed, right? Or sometimes they would just have something that would be a bot like this, where it would be very generic answer, and then, whatever that's needed extra, it will be forwarded to an email of an agent. So what we will see is that we will be using what's called Pyautogui package, which is a library that's written for Python in Python, and it is used to launch WhatsApp app web interface. So it's able to pull the interface and open it up in your default browser. And if you're logged in, you're able to send messages. And so in this lab, you can also use LED, but it's not required. So the whole point is to be able to blink the LED whenever you get a new message or whenever a message is sent. So you can set it up that it will work with hardware along with the software level. So that's probably the reason why I chose this particular exercise originally. When I looked at it, I thought it would be really cool to really understand how to really automate it and get notification physically on the hardware itself. So you can see how that's done. Okay, so WhatsApp, like most of the application that's web-based out there, uses an API, and API simply is an application programmable interface. And so in an application, you tend to see that there might be several APIs used, or there could be one that would encompass everything. A lot of times you would have an API calling another API. Um, so with WhatsApp, we would see that it's using an API. And when we see that it's using an API, a lot of times you can see if you can use some form of script in order to utilize it. So with this, we can automate the messages using Python. And then, you would see that in businesses being used everywhere. So a lot of the app that you use for booking hotels, all the way to, finance control online, you can probably in the back use some kind of programming to be able to automate some of that. And developer built libraries so that way they don't have to recreate some of the processes. So it streamlined that for us. So what you would see is that, businesses will often use something like this. Another thing that we want to touch on is that we have to kind of get around some of the accessing content and be able to read it. So another automation tool that you can use is called Selenium, and it's really intent to really test web applications. So having knowledge of this tool is going to probably help you. You can automate things like tweeting, Facebook, Instagram, a lot of the social media message type. So Selenium is very helpful. Um, and so alternative to Pyautogui, you can also use a library called OpenCV. And this is a screen reader type of library. It's able to allow you to really look at like the type of content that you have, especially in messaging. So you can look for things like emojis, or you can look for certain type of content, especially with text, or even images. So you can do something like this. And like I said, these type of bots would only be intuitive if you make it intuitive. So scaling from what we are using to something down the line, if you wanted to push more on image, based type of searches, you would then have to add in some conditional statement or the criteria on what it's looking for. So with that, do you have any questions for me before we start? Okay, nothing? Okay, so let's talk about what you're gonna need. I mainly want to use Raspberry Pi 4B so that way you can actually see the interface for this particular project. Can you run it on the other Pi? Sure. But if you don't have a desktop, it's not able to pull browser. So you have to do everything in the terminal. But for B with the Raspbian OS install, we talked about that last 2 sessions. You need to make sure that it's plugged in. If you are not using a monitor, mouse, keyboard, you can SSH or VNC into the Pi, so that way you can access it. If you use SSH, you're only going to see the terminal if you're using command line SSH. If you want to SSH and see the desktop, you have to use some type of application. Putty is one of them, as I mentioned last time. So if you want to connect it with VNC, that will probably be a better deal. You also need to have active internet connection, which all of you do because you're on Zoom now. Optional will be a breadboard, an LED, 2 jumper cables. If you have resistors, you can also adapt resistor as the diagram shows it. But when you plug in the LED, your positive connection will be to the 3 volt. So we'll touch on that when we get closer for those of you who are new to it. So once you're connected with the Pi, let's say using VNC or you're on it, you would then need to access terminals. So let me see if I can get into VNC now, okay? There we go. And so to open terminal, you simply click this. And the first thing we need to do is we need to do an update on it, okay? And this might take a minute depending on the type of packages that you need to pull. So you would need to issue sudo apt update as we are logged on as Pi user. And then after that, we would then need to do an upgrade so that way your software can be updated. So if you recently done the upgrade, it doesn't take very long, but if you haven't done that yet, it will take about a minute or two. Okay. So when you look at the information that you're getting when you upgrade, you notice that it's going to pull a lot of the software, right? And then for the update, it's going to pull the firmware for you. So like any project, you should always start with updating and upgrading, because that way if you run into errors down the line, you don't have to worry about, outdated libraries and content of your software files. So we want to make sure we get those things in. Okay, so I've done step 2 and 3. And if you haven't installed Python 3, you can do that. I have that installed. We talked about that yesterday. Okay. So for those of you who took the last class, you probably have it installed. So make sure that we install Python 3 and idle 3. Now, even though some of the libraries are written in the older Python version, it'll still be able to work because you do have Python 2 defaulted in your Raspberry Pi 4 or B+. And you will notice that when you work with the Pi compared to the Pi 0W, um, Pi 4 is tremendously faster, right? The core, you have quad core on the Pi 4, you have more RAM. You know, even though you're using the same size SD, you're going to see that Pi 4 is going to be faster. Okay. Now, when you transition from Python 2 to Python 3, whenever you read the instructions, you know, when you see pip, that's really package installation for Python. That's what it stands for, pip. And if you want it for Python 3, you have to say pip 3. Now, this is the command that works with most command line, but if you're using a specific version of Linux, right, you have to do the installation a little bit different. Um, you know, for example, Arch Linux uses different command when you're pulling packages compared to Debian-based Linux. So, or if you're using FreeBSD, that's a little different. So, just make sure that you go to the documentation, and it's pretty straightforward. If you look up OpenCV, they usually have a short tutorial on how to do the installation. Okay. So we touched on before, if you wanted to know what OpenCV works for, that's really allow us to read the screen and navigate across the screen. Like, you know, how if you were to move your mouse and keyboard. Okay, so it's a way for the system to interface with the application um, from a GUI standpoint. Okay, because all of the background that you see, it's going to really have to execute functions that's going to be able to go to specific locations or look for certain object. That's part of the graphical user interface. So next we are going to install OpenCV for Python. So I can simply copy and then I right click on my terminal and I can do a paste. Okay. And yours might take a little longer. I just want you to know that, you know, because I had installed it, it would already put in the new version. So it would tell me that it's already satisfied. So if you have not installed it before, it's going to take like about close to a minute just to get everything. If it asks you if you want to write this into the drive, which is your SD, you want to press Y for yes. So there will be several packages that we will pull that will require um, your drive space, which is your SD card. So make sure that you answer yes, right? Y to get it downloaded and installed. Okay. So we have installed OpenCV. And then we are going to install additional library. And these libraries are specifically designed to be able to have WhatsApp communicate with the Raspberry Pi at the serial level, and then also get it to be able to for authentication purposes and stuff like that down the line. So we're going to see some of that. So we're going to do the atlas. Okay, and on these, just again, like I said, just make sure that you um, answer yes if it prompts you. Okay. And when you look at the prompt given back to you after when you do the installation, you can see that, there are multiple languages that are being incorporated with the library, right? While it is Python, you would see that some part of the library, some of the files is using Ruby. Ask WhatsApp uses Ruby. So a lot of the web-based application you would see that uses Ruby, and then also Ruby on Rails for the framework. That's different than the language itself, but you would then use Ruby on Rails framework for web app. Okay. Question? All right. So here, it also tells you something important, just don't ignore it. It says the following package automatically are no longer required. So sometime you would have packages that are already built into like one of the ones that we have downloaded and installed. So that means that if you go through some instruction or tutorial, and if they require the package that are already built in, then you don't have to do the installation for that. But if they're different, then yes, you have to pull it. So for the X509, this is used for the X509 frame and so on. So when you start, understanding like some of the services and how that tied to some of the library, you're gonna see the puzzles being put together a little bit clearer. But so here we install Atlas. Then next we are going to install the additional. So this is going to be the libhdf5. And all of these are needed for WhatsApp to work. Okay. It's a lot of work in the back, but you're going to see that it's helpful. Okay. And then we're going to do the serial dev. And this particular library is for serial signal. Okay. So WhatsApp was really written for, phones or smart devices that can communicate with voice, and also, digital communication as well. So ultimately, everything is going to be encapsulated and transition or transformed to, or digitized, right? So what you see is you have to bring in some of the libraries that would, you know, allow you to have high definitions, that would allow you to have that it should be able to receive serial signal. So serial signal it's meant that signal is being received one at a time, right? So that could be 1 bit at a time, or in some of the libraries that's going to require you to have additional components that will make the app work. So then what we need next is we are going to do some stuff with Qt. Okay, so we're going to pull that. And Qt is often used in many areas, from development with the GUI all the way to, so for C++ people, right, if you wanted to really bring in some of the library for GUI or game design, you can use Qt. Many developers, they have access some portion of it or rewrite some of it for other purposes. So you would find some of the libraries that are similar. So here's the Qt4. Okay. And keep in mind that I already have these downloaded. So Yours might take a little bit longer. Okay. So I try to keep pace where, okay, any question? And you can always type it in, of course. I just wanted to, since I have my DNC open, I'll just copy and paste it over. Okay. And so that would take care of all the packages that we need to install, because in the script, you're gonna have to import in, right, parts or components from those packages. You will bring in some of the methods, or sometimes you would have commands that were written from a certain package. So we wanted to make sure that you have all the tools that you need before we go into the actual coding part. Any question? Okay. And if you don't have pip3, I forgot to put this up a little higher because I modified some stuff around. Um, so if you don't have pip3, you have to install it, because your Raspberry Pi will not know what pip is, right? It won't have the package for it. So basically, we're using a package to um, download and install the other packages. So what you have to do is, if you don't have pip, you would need to install it. Oh, no. Sorry. It's Microsoft Word is having issues right now. So hold on 1 second. My computer is protesting. So yeah, it just crashed on me at the moment. Okay. All right. So we are at step 6, in that we would do a Python pip. Okay, you're still trying to start your Raspberry Pi? Okay, that's fine. I'll slow down a little bit so that way you can catch up and everyone can catch up. Okay, any question while we kind of take a little time to kind of get situated? So as you can see, I know that, for those of you who took the Raspberry Pi class, you saw some projects that mainly we install maybe one package and then we started building the script right away, or we would, um, start programming and then import in some of the pieces from that package. But when you deal with web-based and some of the interface, especially like web app, you will have to look at the appropriate library that you need, and also, the communication, the authentication, and so on. So it won't be as simple as what the task that you've seen in the past, or when you work with, just electronics, or just, an app that's already installed on the Raspberry Pi, like for example, Minecraft Pi, right? You would just need its library and then you would just work on it. So in this case, we want to make sure that we have all the components that we need, all the packages that we need before we start programming. Okay. Oh, I have a syntax dash pip. Okay, so let me go back to share screen. Okay, so as you go through and install the packages, right? Some of the package, when it's specifically for Python, then you need to do the pip. And in Windows or Mac OS, right? I think Mac uses wheel. Um, and then you can use that to download the pip packages or use the pip packages. Lately, I noticed that the community have really found ways to really simplify the installation process for Python packages. So instead of going through 5 steps, they're able to put it into one, and then you just do a pip command and pull the package, and it will set up all the needed package for that other one to work. Um, so that's really nice, right? We really improve in the development area in that sense. Okay. So after, as you go through, and we're at number 6, we would need pip3. And so that way we can use that package with Python 3. Um, number 7 talks about pyperclip, okay, and Pyautogui. We touched on Pyautogui earlier. So you will need to install pyperclip and Pyautogui to automate the actual messages like sending and receiving messages. So when it receives, it would then, if you plug in your LED, it will blink, right? But what happens is we can write a function so that way it detects the receipt of the message, and then it's going to automatically send. So let's say that I'm a user and I'm using WhatsApp and I'm trying to communicate with the Raspberry Pi using my smartphone, right? I would message it and I would say, "Hi, how are you?" Right? And it then the Raspberry Pi would then automate the response, right? Like, "I'm fine, thank you." So you see a lot of this when you chat with customer service online. It's not a real person that's responding, right? It's the computer that's responding. So I want you to see it in the background for something that we use every day, like WhatsApp, so that way you can see how that's done. Okay. So Pyautogui is used to read elements on the screen, like what we talked about, what would be with the mouse and the keyboard as in events. And when I teach CIS30A, or if you learned GUI development before in the prior class, you saw that everything is going to be event driven for most part. When the user interact with an application with a graphical user interface, that user would then have to click or type something, so that will be an input. And with that, the system has to see that it is an event as it waits for some kind of response from the user with the input. So Pyautogui is used to read the elements on the screen that would then be generated with the mouse and the keyboard event. So when they type into the text, right, when you message your friend, think about your smartphone. When you message your friend or your family member and so on, your children, your spouse, what you see is that, you're typing into a text box, and then that message would then, and once you click send, you actually clicking send. So when you're messaging, there are two things that are happening. There are two type of events. Number one, that's a keyboard input event. Number two, it's a clicking event when you click the send. So in development, when we'll program, we have to think about the sequential process or the processes that's happening with the user when they're interacting with the user interface. And that's important. Okay. So just, throwing in the library and be able to do that, if you really dive a little deeper and think about the processes, it's going to make a lot more sense when you're looking at the script. Okay. When we're saying, oh, this is what it's doing, um, you know, or when you're trying to program and put together a script that will work in this type of scenario. So Pyperclip is used to copy and paste the information in between the screen and the Python program. So Pyperclip is exactly what its name's supposed to be when you're clipping things, right? Um, you know, Microsoft uses clipboard and so on. But in the back, this type of library, all that is when you copy and pasting, you're extracting the information and putting it into memory, and then retrieve that from the memory location and put it into its destination, which is somewhere on the screen, right? Could be in a message type of pop-up or something in the background. So Pyperclip is designed to really, you know, for the copy and paste functionality, and in the back, all that is a group of functions that take something and put it into memory location, which has a memory address, and then be able to pull it as it's pulling that for the pacing purposes. And then eventually bring it forward and putting it back on screen. So um, then we would then have to do the next part, which is pip 3, because we already have pip at this point. Pip 3 install Pyperclip. Okay, so I'll go ahead and copy this command. We just talk about copy and paste, right? And then we're going to paste it here. Okay, so mine is already satisfied. Yours will likely having to, you know, wait a little bit, and then you might have to respond yes for it to get everything. So when you read this message, you would see that all the Python packages, right, that are supported is coming from pypy.org. And in order to get those packages and pull them, we would use PyWheel. Therefore, Mac OS and would use wheels, as I mentioned earlier. Um, so, and then it tells me the destination of my package. Now, when you're getting a Python package, when you do a pip3, it's going to link that to the Python version. And that's why we have to use pip3 instead of pip. Because if we just use pip, it will just link it to, so it will put it in the directory in a folder for the appropriate version. Okay. Now, if you don't, let's say I do a pip and I'm using Python 3, when you import the statement, right, it might not be able to find it. Okay. If you need to pull something from the actual package, it will send you an error on when you run the interpreter. It's going to say, oh, it cannot find the actual package. Okay. Then next we are going to bring in Pyautogui. Okay. And I have mine installed, but yours will take a little bit and it's going to go. So again, we see that now it's in the Python 3.7, right? And it's part of site packages. So it tells you the directory where it's at. So in case you need to troubleshoot, right, you can find it. Okay. So here while some of you still getting the packages, I'm going to talk about the components a little bit. So Raspberry Pi has the pins on the top and they're called GPIO. Okay. GP stands for general purpose. IO stands for input output. And it's designed to receive or send electrical signal for input and output devices, especially electronic components like LEDs. So you can plug sensors, or Raspberry Pi uses hat with sensors. You can adapt the whole IC with it. It's simplified the process, but it is a little bit higher in price compared to a microcontroller like Arduino Uno. Um, but in simple concept, it would still be able to blink an LED. You can adapt sensor. And the breadboard is, think of it like a way for us to connect the electrical components where it would send signal. And when you do use the breadboard, you want to make sure that your wire line up in with the electrical components connection. So for example, if you look at this picture, I'm going to pull it bigger. This is a ground wire and it needs to line up with the short leg of the LED. This is the resistor, and resistor is used to regulate current that's flowing from the Raspberry Pi to the breadboard and then eventually to the electrical component. So you usually would have, you always have positive and negative. And in this diagram, what's shown here is the positive side, right? We want to connect that to, if you have the resistor, you don't have to, right? To align it with the leg of the resistor. And then from that resistor, it's going to transfer that signal to the positive side of the electrical component, and then it's going to exit out to the ground. So as your circuit is a path and it's a circular path, so and you would always have the polarity with the LED. So you would have the, when it's curling like this, that means it's the long leg with the positive, and then the short leg with the ground. Okay. Now, if you don't have the resistor, that's okay. You just have to plug the red, the positive, which is 3.3 volts. Okay, so you would plug this to the 3.3 volts. So how do I know which pin to use? For those of you who didn't take the last class, in the Canna box, they have this card. Okay, it looks like a postcard, but on it, you would see the GPIO label. Okay, and you would know which one is which. Okay. So the front of the Pi is going to be closer to the USB connection. The back of the Pi is going to be where the logo is going to be. So when you look at it, the front of it, right, you're going to see the 5 volts and the 3 volts in the front. Okay. I'll come back to this. I think there's a mislabel, but okay. So you can connect it. This you don't have to, but if you have the components, you can plug it up. Any question? So the next part you are going to use, we can do the terminal where we can pull the file and then unzip it. I had include that in the second part of this lab exercise, which is optional to really install your WhatsApp. But what we're gonna do is I'm gonna copy this hyperlink, and then I'm gonna go to my Raspberry Pi. I'm going to open up my web browser, which is Chromium. And then I'm gonna go ahead and paste and go to the actual site. And it's cut off, but let me expand it so you can see. It's cut off on my thing, but here we go. But you should get a zip file downloaded. Okay. So what you want to do is you want to copy the hyperlink. Okay. And then you want to, if you're using monitor, mouse, and keyboard, just put your cursor on that link, and then you can find the actual website. But you want to download it on the Raspberry Pi. Okay, not your computer, on the Raspberry Pi. Okay. So open up the Chromium, and it doesn't take long if you have good connection. So what that is the creator for this project, they put together different images, right, that will be used in the actual code itself, and then also the script, so you don't have to type everything out from scratch. Okay. Another way that you can do this is you can use wget, and then you would put in the URL, but you have to tell it to download the zip, which file it is. That's if you want to use a terminal. And then once it's downloaded, you would then navigate. So you would have to do CD to downloads, and then you can use tarzi or targi, or you can do unzip command, and it will extract it. But I'm going to use the graphical user interface, so that way you're a little bit, you know a little bit of that too. Okay. So once you have this, you can look at the next step. It tells you that, inside this file, you have five images and the Python script. Then the images will help us in different parts. Okay. Always make sure that you execute the Python file in the same directory. So if you extract it and it's kind of spread everywhere in a folder, make sure that they are all together in that folder. Because when you run the Python file, if you don't have the images, you are going to get an error. Okay. If you don't extract the actual zip folder that you downloaded, you are going to get an error. And you can't run the Python file unless you extract it anyway. Okay. So here I wrote some instruction for you, but if you visit the tutorial and the website, you're gonna find that there's some issues. So I fixed some of the problem that they had posted, because the tutorial was written a while back and things changed since then. And that's the downside with Linux, is sometimes versions don't work, sometimes apps, they change up some things, and so you kind of have to kind of work your way back and see what you need. Okay, so once you have downloaded that, you can go directly into your file, and you can click on it, and you can say open. Okay, but if you don't know, and if you want to know where it is, okay, one second, let me pull this down. Sorry, let me adjust my VNC real quick. It's not. Okay. All right, now it's better. Sorry. I'm trying to use multiple windows, inside window for share screen. Okay, so once you click open, you would see there's an extract button at the top here. Okay. So it's really easy. You can just click extract file. But here, what you want to do is you want to put you can put it in the location. I think I tell you to put it in the home folder under Py. I think most of the users, they keep it like that there. And then you just click extract. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. So if you can't click the file open after you download it, you can always go to the downloads folder. Okay. And then it should be there. It should say Python Raspberry Pi code WhatsApp.zip. As you see, I have multiple there because I tested and then I now demo it. Okay. And then you can also double click it there and then extract it. Just make sure that you point it to the path. So as you extract it, you can double check. Okay. Now the way that it opens up, it's not going to keep the same folder name. So you're going to see a thing called code file. That's it, right? Inside code file, if you open that folder up, you should see the images that they're talking about and the script. Any question? Okay, so just to be clear, I had downloaded using Chromium, right? And then I extracted it, but when I extract it, I put it under the home Pi folder. So make sure that you put in the path at the top. And then when you navigate to the home Pi folders, you're going to see code file and you would see your script there and your images there. So while some of you are working on that, okay, I want to let you know that we just did 10 and 11 and 12. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to do a run through with the script so you know, right? Because it's not just about downloading somebody's script, but when you look at that script, what does it mean, right? What is happening? Okay. And I put down here, and you can go through it, you can take a look at it. So earlier we installed many packages, and those packages will be utilized now in the script. First, we are going to import in, right, the Pyautogui. So this is going to allow us to be able to move the mouse, the cursor, the keyboard, and make clicks. Okay, that's the library. And then the time import sleep, that's going to be for delay purposes. There will be time that there needs to be pause. So we want to be able to do that. So automation also is about syncing. And when you are trying to do automation, you have to think about how does that going to be implemented in real life, real time, or close to real time. So there might be some, because if you think about that, when let's say that I'm trying to chat with the customer service, you know how it shows like, maybe a little wait sign. And so there might be a pause in between, and then you would be respond as the system, it might need that time to also make some adjustment or do some search. Um, so we want to have the time component in this. Also, we talked about, sorry, I have a typo there. Import pyperclip for copy and paste. We are going to import a package called web browser. So that way it would automatically open the default web browser that's installed. So on a system that has 5 different web browser application, the one that's set at default to always open for all the web application is going to be that. Okay. And then since if you are using the LED, then you have to do the rpy.gpio. Okay. And that allows us to access what's called the header file for the general input output connection for the electronic components. And then we're also going to import time only. And this one, it actually imports sleep, which is await. And then if you import time, that would also provide delays in the program. Okay, question. Okay. Then if you are using your LED, then you can include the GPIO material. If you don't, you can leave that out. Okay, so those 2 line is mainly for the GPIO. Okay, so here on your board, you need to have you are connecting your LED to pin 40. Okay, which is a data pin, and that's GPIO 21. So when you look at this, if you're looking at, yeah, so I think the drawing for them, the drawing the diagram. So that will be the last 2 right here on your card. Okay, the 40 and the ground. Okay. So you would then connect it. Sure. So whatever that you would physically connect, you want that to be the same in your program. And so when you're using IO set mode, in order to access that pin, you have to you have to set mode and you have to set it up. Okay. So first we want to say set mode. And what that will do is it's going to basically access the IO on your Raspberry Pi. Then when we do setup, it's going to activate, and whatever the pin that you use, you have to put that in here, 40. And you want it to be outputting, so that means it's going to blink from that pin 40. Okay. Question. Okay, so if you did the LED, you have to include this part. If you don't, you can comment it out, right? But if you run it without it, I don't think that that's going to be a problem anyway. Okay. All right. Then the next part here, you would see that it's going to use the web browser, okay, and it's going to open the website. Now, if if so if you import in web browser, all you have to do is use the open new function or method that is written in this particular package. It was in a module in there. So we are going to open a new, and so basically all that is just going to open up the web browser and go to that page. Okay. Assuming that you already authenticated, then what it will do for that application, what that will do is it's going to send 3 messages. First, it's going to send, hi, I am a WhatsApp bot, okay, a robot from Raspberry Pi. I can help you with basic automation. I can try anything in the following: turning on light, turning off light. Okay. So can you plug this into an actual light at your home? Sure. If you find your way to really wire the connection or a controller of your light to it, right? And so if you think about like the home automation device, what it really is is it would probably utilize some kind of USB um, communication, which is on serial level, and be able to connect to some of the electrical components because we have power on USB now and be able to do that. Okay. So, so it's going to send out this message. That's going to be the default. And as you notice that they are using the square bracket here, the square brace here. What that means is that we're using a list or an array of different strings. Okay. And then here we also create another list or array, and we would say turn on light. Sure. Okay. So when somebody message turn on light, then it's going to activate it. And this is how some of the app actually works in home automation, right? You can you can press a button, would issue a command to your home systems, and then it activates, it opens your garage, it turns on your light, it turns on your AC if you have like the right controller in place. Okay, so here we have turn on light, and then it should respond sure, right? That will be turned on. And the reason why we're using an LED is set so that way you would see that it turns on or off. And then the turn off light option, we would have okay, your LED is now turned off. Okay. All right. Then next, what it's going to do is going to check if the chat page is open successfully, and it's going to search for the image. Okay. So here we would have a function as it is an event. We would have a function, and this function is going to be to see, it's going to find, okay? And so for an application, it's going to look for different components on the application, such as the logo or the header. Okay, so if you have a specific image on a website, right, and you want to search for that, you have to be able to write the function and have it seek it. Okay, so here we have a while loop. It's going to try to find it. And we simply would use Pyautogui, right, to locate things on screen. And that's a method that's written in that library, or a function that's written in that library. Okay. And then we also need to apply a condition. If it's used somewhere else, right, clicking on use here, it's going to wait 2 seconds. Then, it's going to move to different position on that screen. Okay. So the way that they did this is that they really take a look at what's being laid out on that actual page, right? Or ultimately the content of that web app page. Okay. So as it's going to move to the button, we want that button to automatically click. So we would then use the click function from the Pyautogui library. Okay, and then pause. Next, on the next function, this is going to check to see if there's new messages. Okay, and then open it. So the way that WhatsApp is using the indicator, like most of the app, right, that you see, green means that there is something, right? And then red or blank is nothing. So here what you see is there's green circle, right? And for the green circle that's defined is it's going to look for that green circle on the screen. Okay. And then once, if it sees it, it's going to wait, then it's going to move over and it's going to click, wait 1 second. Then, it's going to look for the OK button, which is an image. It's going to move over to that. It's going to click it. Okay. Because when people send message, when you receive that message, it has an indicator, which is green. So it needs to look for that. Then it needs to go down. It's going to click it to open it. Then after it views it, after we view it, we have to click OK. So if you're thinking about how to really write the function, you have to really think about the sequential process in how the user interact with that application. Okay. And then we have an else condition, otherwise it just waits. Okay. So that's the second function. Then we also have a function to read the message. So first it got to find the message, then it needs to read the message, right? Then it also needs to replay the message and so on. So as you read through this, I added some of the pieces, the comments, so that way you would know like what that's doing. Okay. So it's going to look for that particular image, which is a smiley paperclip. And then it's going to wait, then it's going to click. Okay. Then here it's going to use a hotkey, Control C, copy, and then paste. Remember that we use pyperclip for a reason, because we wanted to execute Control C and Control and paste. Okay. Any question? So now when you start seeing these automated apps online, right? When you're using websites, you would see that, there's a lot of like really small details that goes into the functionality of it, the functions that's written behind it. Okay. Then we can also have another function that we want to be able to replay some of the message and then also show the response. So here, this one is to really get the incoming message. If it receives the queue from the incoming message, which is in string cdbot, it's going to send a default message. If the light is turned, and then if it gets a message, it's going to turn on the light. So it's going to send a signal to the pin, and then it's going to, if the light is off, then it's going to turn off that signal, turn off light. It's going to send that message, turn off light on Snapchat. I mean, not Snapchat, WhatsApp. All right. Then we also need to check for unopened message. So this function is going to go to the position, look for, right, a specific color. And if all the color is on, that means it's not open, and it's going to indicate, it's going to return 1. If so, when it sees the new message, you want it to also, I think this should be tapped in. Sorry, guys. And then this also needs to tap in. I forgot to tap that in. All right. So if it sees a new message, it's going to open it. Okay. And then it's going to print this. And then it's going to also notify. Okay. New messages available. And then it's going to read, So for the incoming message, it's going to put it into the read queue. So that means that we can then execute the read message, and then it's going to come back to the other function. Okay. So now for the message content, it's going to take a look at what's being sent. And then it's going to send a message. So with this, if you look at the get response, then you can go back to that. You can implement the condition on the specific that you want to look for in that incoming message. Image, certain, keywords and so on. And Python has wonderful built-in things that you can, you can look at, you can slice up the strings and look at some of the things in that string and be able to do that. So this is why you see that it's being used for analysis, it's used for machine learning, and it's used for artificial intelligence. Okay. And so that kind of give you the basic in how a bot would go through and, look at incoming message, new message, how it reads the content of that message, where it looked for specific things, and how it would automatically respond. Okay. Any question? So for the next part, oh, so would a shopping bot be programmed the same way? Yep. But I would, so the shopping bot, depending on if you're looking at if it's a crawler or not. So let's say that I design an application that a bot that would just shop from one website. Yeah, it's going to look for, it's easier to do it from one website because that website would be the same unless they change it up, right? So once it's authenticated, it's going to look for certain things. Like you can look for, like, let's say you can have it look for sales, um, or a certain price, and then have it add to cart, and then have it process to checkout. But if you have one, like, if you've seen like the ones that look for coupons and things like that, it has to go through, all the websites that would have specific things, and it would look for the content. So just the criteria, the if else statements are a lot more incorporated. So you have lots more criteria conditions applied. All of this, right, when you hear like, machine learning, all of that is just how the conditions are applied, and then you can train it. So you would hone down on specific algorithm. Okay. Question. Good question. So now you can see how that would be designed. Then next, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to your file here. And then you can double click the script. And in terminal, you would then do cd, right? Code/file, because the space, the white space, in Linux, you have to tell it what that is. It's not underscore, that's different. And then you would then do a Python or sudo Python and then execute the file. But I want to use an interface a little bit more. We've done a lot of terminal, so you can just click run here, and then there is your WhatsApp. So the downside of this is that I don't have a native application that's installed on my Raspberry Pi. I also am not authenticated to it. Okay. So if you want, you can test this. You can go through, create an account or log into your account, and then be able to do that. Now, installing WhatsApp on Raspberry Pi itself is, I put the instruction for you to do it there. It's not a simple task. you can try using the Android version for it to put it on the Raspberry Pi. Most of the Android version the for most of the apps will work, and then some don't. Okay, no guarantee, because it depends on whether Google supports it or not. But so what I did was I had put how to install it on there for you. Okay, so I encourage you to go through this, and it actually walks you through on the and I'm gonna walk you through most of it next. But when it gets to this part, you have to put in your mobile information because it's gonna be tying your WhatsApp account to a number, right? Like a mobile number, because that's how we use voice over IP, is that we're able to, if you want to call and message, you have to be able to do that. Yes, I know. Um, but it's also popular here. A lot of people I know use this WhatsApp, but it could be a generational thing. Okay. So, I've seen people here use it though. Like people here, they use it to call international places. Um, or, I know my cousins, they use WhatsApp, but so it really depends on the person, I think. Okay. So some of the things that I want to highlight before I start getting into some of the step is that when you see the phone number here, your country code in USA is 01, and then your mobile country code is going to be listed here. Um, so the mobile country code, it's really depend on your service provider, but for most North American ones like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, some of these like Virgin Mobile, etc. Like for us, for most of us, we would use the 310 for the MCC. And then for the network, then you have to look for your specific network. Like if you use AT&T, you would use this, okay? Let's say if but see, AT&T has different ones too. So if you're using Cricket with AT&T, you would use 16. But if you're using AT&T or Sentinel AT&T, because they own so many things, and you have to have the proper things. So I found this part a little bit uh, confusing in a way, but because if you're not sure which Verizon that you're using with the network, so you have to look at, what Verizon network or which network that you're using. Otherwise, it won't be able to send you the text message. So, when you receive these activation code and text messages that would notify you for the things, right? The application that they designed for them to input in of your phone number, that application actually has to use this to be able to navigate to the actual network. Otherwise, it would not know. Okay. So this gives you a little bit of background on how these applications work. And especially for like Google Voice, WhatsApp, some of the application that utilize voice over IP, they have to use these type of codes. Okay. I mean country code, regional code, network phone, and so on. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think it's, when it first came out, there were millions or people around the world really liked it. Um, they originally, they made it where it's just free, and they really, and there are other apps that are comparable to it internationally, of course. But um, and so when they came out and they announced it and they did a lot of stuff to really promote it, a lot of people jump on the bandwagon for it. And now they start supporting more network connections. So as you can see, so when you get to that part, make sure that you look up this table, which I put the link there for you. Okay. I use T-Mobile, so I would just use this. Okay. But if you have AT&T, you gotta look at like which network of AT&T that you originated, you sign your contract with, because it was originally like singular or other areas. So yeah, it can be very confusing. Okay. And then it also ties to the region. So when I tested this earlier, I think I had used one of the wrong code. So if you were originally Sprint, now T-Mobile, you have, it's so that's the hardest part to really get it to install it outside of just downloading and installing it. Okay. So when you get to this section, you got to play with the mobile and the network code and so on. And you can also search for some additional help online. So what this does is it actually register you, so you would get a text message. And I think that they also add in in the Python library, they also have an option switch R to do a registration. It's like clicking on the registration button, and then you will get a text message. So you have to put in your phone number, and then you gotta, and so on. So this walks you through on how you can program your way through, the registration process with an application like this. And I thought it will be useful in case in the future if you want to make your own web app and you want to, use some of the library to really, do that. Okay, so kind of cool to kind of learn. Okay, so you can try this out. I kind of ran out of time, so I was not able to test some of the mobile network part. But for the exercise itself, okay, um, you can you should try getting the app and see if you can send message to it, and then see if it's gonna respond. Okay, all right. And then if you can't get it to work, just take a picture for me that you have this, that your browser opens up. And you should have like a QR. So yeah, so for the lab submission, do we, yeah, yeah. So you can do that if you don't want to test it with an actual app. Because with the, if you have an app already, you can try to send messages to it. But on the Pi itself, if you really want to see it to work, you have to get the app installed on it. Okay. So your option would be either try to use the Android version on it, or if you use the web app version, you can try to link the device to it, or you can, you know, do the script like what I showed you at the end. Okay. If we logged on with the scanning QR app on our phone, how do we send message to the Pi? So Kevin, like I said, you have to get the Pi to have the application itself, so that way you can see your message, right? So you can do the second part and then see if you can install, but it's still going to be tied to your phone number, because that's how WhatsApp works, is that it would only be tied to the device. And when you look at the link, it also tells you, um, when I checked Chromium previously, this is what happens, right? So, sorry, let me rerun this. So when I run this opens up, right? It loads the page, and then it gives me the QR, okay? But when you look at the QR, supposedly it's for the Pi itself. And it tells you, oh, tap the setting and then select the link device. So if let me pull this down a little bit, because, or let's get this down a little because I can't see the top. Um, if you click the setting button, like what it says, this is, and so if you go to settings, right, you can try to see if you can link it, but I didn't see the link option here. Um, so so that this the script itself, it works. Okay. Use here. And then what it'll do is it will time out the QRs with the registration process. Yep. So use your phone number at least. Any other questions or comment? So play with it and then let me know how you liked it or not like it. This is the first time I tested this particular project. So you know, tomorrow we will work on some of this if you still stuck on something, or we can also move on to other things. Okay, any question for me? Yeah, so you have to be, if you don't want to use your mobile phone because you're uncomfortable doing that, that's fine. You can just take an image of where we left off. That's okay. But I like for you to test it if you can, or if you wish to. Okay. Do we have any questions? So check out the exercise on how to install it individually, the app itself, onto Raspberry Pi. And you notice that you also need to have cryptography and all of that. Um, I modified some of the things. So you need to download YOSUP, and then you need to unzip it, and then you need to go into the actual, and you can do the setup install. Okay. So everything should work to here, and then this is going to be based on your personal information because it would require your phone number, your country code, your network code, or your mobile provider code and your network code. Okay. And then if everything works correctly, you should get a text message that will allow you to have a registration code. And then that registration code would then be able to get you to access it on that device. Okay. Okay. So the second part to this part is not required, but I want to show you how to do that. Any question? Okay, I'm gonna stop recording, and then you can type in your name in the chat so that way I have a record that you showed up, and then we can pick up tomorrow where we will work on another. So if you like to do another project, you can. You don't have to do these particular project, but at the end we'll do something that would also make it like an IoT, right? So you could see. Thank you so much. And then I'm available until 4 if you have questions.